Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about basic HTML and how you can begin to code using HTML in your Canvas courses. If you've ever been editing a page and you wonder what this little icon is right here and it switches to the HTML editor, then you might panic, but we're actually going to take a look at what is this code and how can you use code to create content for your Canvas courses. So we're going to work to create a very basic page in a Canvas course using elements of HTML. So we're going to explore how to create a header, how to write a paragraph, how to incorporate an image into your course. And in this case, the image is hyperlinked. So when I click on it, it takes me to a really awesome web page. We're going to look at a little bit of text formatting, such as how to emphasize your font using bold and italics. We'll also talk about line breaks and horizontal rules, which are those separators that you see on websites sometimes. And finally, we'll round out our top 10 list, creating an unordered bulleted list, as well as an ordered sequential list. So let's go ahead and get started and edit this page. So like I was mentioning, you can hop over to the HTML editor. You're going to see a lot of gibberish, and we're going to talk today about what all of this means. For now, we'll start with a blank slate. Now I'll start with the concept of a heading. I'll use an H2 right here. There's only one H1. Heading 1 is the largest heading, and there can only be one on a website. And by default in Canvas, the H1 is always the title of your page. So whatever you name it, that's going to be the H1. But you can use H2, H3, 4, 5, 6, and you always want to nest it. You don't want to have an H3 unless you have an H2 first. And you don't want to go to H2, then jump to H4 before you do an H3. But today we're keeping it simple, and I'm just going to have an H2. So once I define H2 with my HTML, then I can type in my heading. Now in HTML, you always want to close your tags. And so whenever I have an H2, I need to define when the H2 stops. Now the reason why we never want to skip the end tag is because essentially HTML is hypertext markup language, and this is the language that the web browser reads in order to interpret the information that's on a website. And so whenever we say, hey browser, hey Chrome or Safari or whatever you're using, we're going to have a header right here. Then the browser has to know, okay, what exactly is the header? And then we specify, this is the header. It's everything between these two tags right here. And so now I have a header. If I go out of the HTML editor and go to rich text, I can see, yep, there's my header. And I can also see on the rich content editor toolbar that, yeah, that's indeed a header too. And so it is possible to do a lot of this stuff without using HTML, but we're just going to explore this HTML editor. After the heading, I want to put a paragraph. The paragraph tag is simply a P. Now the P is within these angle brackets, which looks like a less than and a greater than symbol. And then the P sits right in the middle of that. And so then I'll have my paragraph, and I want to, first I'm going to make sure that I close my paragraph. And then everything that you put in between the P and the /P will be your paragraph. And one thing I want to emphasize is that the HTML editor is a little bit different than the rich content editor, in that if you have line breaks, then it doesn't really matter unless you define in HTML a line break. And to showcase this, I'm going to copy our one paragraph, and I'm going to put 3 different paragraphs. And so in one paragraph, I'm going to put a bunch of line breaks. I'll put these line breaks throughout, just like that. So you can see it's a paragraph, but it encompasses about 6 different lines. For the second paragraph, I'm going to put a bunch of spaces in between some of these words. Not all of the words, but just, so it's kind of a little bit awkward. It's a little bit distinct, I would say. And so here's a paragraph with a lot of line breaks. Here's a paragraph that has lots of spaces in between words. And then here's a normal paragraph. And you'll see that when we hop out to the rich content editor, each paragraph looks exactly the same. So all of those breaks, all of those spaces, those aren't part of HTML code, and then when I hop back over here, it goes back to normal. Now if you put one space in between 2 words in the HTML editor, it recognizes that as a space. But if you put more than one space, then it won't recognize that as many spaces. It just recognizes it as 2 words, and there needs to be a space in between those 2 words. So if I actually wanted a line break, if I have a paragraph and I don't want a second paragraph, but I do want to have a break, then you can use HTML for that. The HTML code is BR. So that's the third thing that we're learning right now, is there's an H2, there's a paragraph, and then within this paragraph, there's a break. It's still the same paragraph, but then when I hop over here, you can see that this paragraph in the middle is different than the first two because I added that break. And the break is just a hard break. It forms a new line, but it's all the same paragraph. So let me go ahead and keep that first paragraph, but now we're going to add a picture. So the HTML for picture is img, and an image tag is different than these other tags in that you don't have to close it. So there doesn't exist a tag close image. This is one of the few self-contained tags, and so I don't have to specify that. But what I do have to specify is what image do I want in there. And so you're going to type src equals and a quotation mark, and then you put in the URL to the picture that you want. Now in the rich content editor in Canvas, you can just upload a picture from your computer into Canvas, but in my case, I want to use a picture from Unsplash. So let's look at this picture right here, and I'm going to grab the image address. And the image address, if I were to open this in a new window, this is the image address. So if you were to type this into the URL bar in your browser, then this image would come up. And that's the image that I want to put into my course. And so I'm going to put img space src. I'll just copy the code, which is the URL to that picture. And then when I come over here, then I can see, all right, there's the picture. Now that's a pretty big picture and it's taking up the entire width of the screen. And so what I can do is I can say anywhere within the img tag, either after the src or before, I can say I want a width of maybe 350 pixels. Now I'm putting that right up front here. I can also put it back here if I wanted to. I just can't put it within the code, but as long as it's separate from that code, then that would be great. So now when I hop over here, I can see it's a big picture, but I specified that I only want it 350 pixels wide. And I didn't specify a height because by default, if you specify a width, it just is going to take that ratio, the dimensions, and it'll keep it intact. And so that's why I only specify the width. Now let's do something else, and when they click on the image, I want that to be actually hyperlinked. And so I'm going to put in some more code, and this is an anchor code. Anchor equals href, and then I can put in a URL. And so this is saying that everything after this anchor tag, when they click on it, it's going to take me to a website. And I haven't defined the website, this is just a placeholder. And then I'm going to specify, okay, so when they click on this image right here, and then I need to close that tag because I don't want my entire website to be one big hyperlink. I only want this image to be hyperlinked. And let's have the user go to the website www.howtocanvas.com. When they click on the image, then that's where they're going to go, is howtocanvas.com. Now I'm going to add one more thing of code inside this anchor, and that's the following: target equals, and within the quotation marks, I'm going to put underscore blank. And what that does, if I go ahead and save this, then you can see that this image is hyperlinked. I can see the cursor change, and when I click on it, it opens up in a new tab. All right, so now we have a heading, we have a paragraph, we have an image, and that image is hyperlinked. I'm going to add another paragraph right here, and this time I want to emphasize some of the elements. And so the first words here, I'm going to put this code strong. For Portland, Intelligentsia, Activated Charcoal, and I think that's about it. And then I'm going to close the strong tab. What that does is it emphasizes these words, and it emphasizes them by bolding them. You can also use the tag B for bold, but a good practice today is to use the strong tag. Likewise, I'm going to emphasize some of these over here, and I'm going to emphasize them using EM. And that's emphasis just like the strong, except for the strong bolds the characters and EM italicizes the characters. In the past, you would use I for that, and I still works, but EM is the right way to do it today. And when we hop back out to the rich content editor and see that, then you can see that these words are bold, and then these words here are italicized. This next line of code is pretty simple. I'm going to put HR. And what that does is give me a horizontal rule, so it's a line. It's a good way to distinguish content into sections. Before we move on to the list, let's go ahead and break up this paragraph. Now again, if I put a lot of spaces, that doesn't mean anything, but what I want to do is put a break in the paragraph. So if we peek at what we have, so we have a heading, we have our paragraph, we have a picture, the picture is hyperlinked, we have another paragraph with bold emphasized font, and then a line break. So this is all the same paragraph. I just broke it up into two parts using a break. And then I emphasize some more text, and finally I have a horizontal rule, which is a line that separates the content on my page. The last thing we'll look at is how to create a list, and there are two different types of lists. The first is called an unordered list, and this is when the sequence of the list isn't important, so it's going to create bullet points. An example of an unordered list would be something like a grocery list, and you might have your own personal tradition for traffic flow in the grocery store, but in reality it probably doesn't matter if you buy eggs before cheese or the other way around. So now we have an unordered list and we need list items. In reality, this unordered list has two primary components. One is the actual list item, so the item within the bullet points. This is essentially one bullet point, and the second bullet point would be this one right here. So you have a list item, and then you have the content after the bullet point, and then you have to close that out. And all of these list items fit within the unordered list tag, and then the closing tag right here. So this UL is saying that this is a bullet list as opposed to a numerical list. And then the list items are saying these are the bullet points. Now ordered lists are exactly the same as unordered lists, except for you have an OL instead of the UL. The order in which you put them in makes a difference because the first one is going to be number 1, the second one is going to be number 2, the fifth one is going to be number 5. And so if you want 1 to be number 3, it has to be the third item on there. So now if we hop back out, then we can see our lists. We have a grocery list where the order doesn't matter, and then we have something that's more of a sequence or a process where you go from step 1 to step 2 all the way to step 5. So now let's go ahead and save our page and see what we have. We created all of this content using only the HTML editor. Of course we have the H1 because that's the title of our page, but then we created an H2, we created a paragraph, we have a picture, and this picture is hyperlinked and takes you to an awesome website. And then we have another paragraph that has a break right in the middle, and we caused that break. We have text that's emphasized through bold and through italics. And then we have a horizontal rule, and this distinguishes the first section from the second section, and it creates that separation of content. And finally, we have two lists. So again, here's a paragraph, here's an unordered list, another paragraph, and here's an ordered list. And that's 10 very basic HTML tags that you can learn to get started working in HTML in Canvas. And I'm going to show you a bonus tip. If you look here at the bottom, my content goes right to the bottom of this page, and there's a line here, and then we have the navigation, but I want to put a little bit of space at the bottom. And let me show you how to do that using HTML. Now I could go in here and I could hit some hard returns if I wanted to, but let's explore the HTML editor. What I'm going to do is type in this code. I'm going to create a paragraph, and I'm going to put the characters ampersand NBSP semicolon, and then I'm going to close out the paragraph. What that is, if you remember earlier, I said that if you have 1 million spaces in between two words, then your browser is going to recognize that as two words and one space. And so it's going to take that space out. However, this code here, ampersand NBSP semicolon, is the HTML code for a space, as in a space between words. And so if you create a paragraph, if I created a paragraph without that, then Canvas is just going to delete that. It's going to recognize, here's a paragraph, but there's nothing in there, and so why bother? But if you actually say, nope, there's one space in here, then it'll keep that paragraph, and it'll essentially just be an empty paragraph. Now just for fun, let's come up here. I created all those spaces between the words, and if I go to the Rich Content Editor, you can see that, well, there is no space between those words. However, let's suppose I were to force some spaces. If I were to put a dozen non-breakable spaces and then return here, then guess what? It recognizes I told the browser, yeah, there's a whole bunch of space and that's supposed to be there. But let's go ahead and save this and see how that looks. So now you can see the content, it ends right here, and technically there's a paragraph down here with one single space, and that just gives me a little bit of buffer room between the content. It's probably not the best thing to do, but in a pinch it's fine. So remember to create a paragraph with a non-breaking space if you want to add that little cushion sometimes. And so this is just a little bit of HTML code to get you started. I'll mention as we're leaving that HTML is not case sensitive, so if I were to do a paragraph tag with a capital P or a lowercase p, that doesn't really matter. So try and replicate this page that I created here. If you'd like to see my code, then you can visit howtocanvas.com, and I'll put the code on the blog posts. There's a link to that in the description below. And you can also visit howtocanvas.com for other tips and resources related to Canvas. Don't forget to subscribe to our social media. Everybody, happy teaching and learning.